At 6:47 a.m. on March 28, 1942, Corporal William Harwell lay prone in Libyan sand 3 miles east of Gazala, watching a German officer through iron sights at 480 yards. Harwell was 34 years old, older than most riflemen. He'd been in North Africa 14 months. He'd watched 27 men from his battalion die in the past 4 months. The German officer stood on a ridge with binoculars, directing an infantry advance 300 yards below him. Around Harwell, 31 men from his platoon fired semi-automatic rifles at German infantry 200 yards out. The sound was deafening. Hundreds of rounds per minute. Some hit. Most missed. The German advance continued. The officer on the ridge was untouched. Safe. Coordinating the attack with hand signals and runners. He wore a peaked cap, dark uniform, binoculars raised. Harwell could see him clearly at 480 yards. The officer adjusted his position, pointed left. A runner sprinted down the ridge toward German infantry. 30 seconds later, German troops shifted formation, flanked left, put pressure on the British line exactly where it was weakest. Harwell's platoon mates fired faster. More rounds downrange, more noise, more empty casings hitting sand. The German infantry kept advancing because the German officer kept directing. Nobody was shooting at the officer. Semi-automatic rifles couldn't hit targets at 480 yards. Not accurately. Too much recoil. Too much barrel movement. The rounds went wide or fell short. Harwell carried a Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I bolt-action rifle. 10 rounds, designed in 1907. His platoon mates called it obsolete, called him stubborn for refusing to turn it in when the Army issued semi-automatics. But Harwell knew something they'd forgotten. The Lee-Enfield could hit man-sized targets at 500 yards. He'd done it hundreds of times in Yorkshire before the war. Red deer at 300 to 400 yards. Clean kills, one shot. Precision mattered more than volume when you were shooting deer for Lord Ashton's estate. Precision mattered more than volume when German officers stood at 500 yards, directing attacks that killed British soldiers. Harwell ignored the German infantry, aimed at the officer. Deep breath, half exhale, hold. Squeeze the trigger. What happened in the next 4 seconds would prove whether precision mattered more than volume. Whether one Yorkshire gamekeeper with an obsolete rifle could change British tactics in North Africa. Whether 480 yards was too far or exactly far enough. By March 1942, British forces in North Africa faced a tactical crisis nobody wanted to acknowledge. German Afrika Korps small unit operations succeeded with devastating consistency. British intelligence knew why. German officers positioned themselves 400 to 600 yards behind advancing infantry. They used binoculars to observe British positions. They used hand signals and runners to coordinate attacks. They adjusted tactics in real time based on what they saw. They stayed beyond effective range of British weapons while directing operations that killed British soldiers. British doctrine emphasized suppressive fire at 200 to 300 yards. Volume of fire. Keep the enemy's head down. Semi-automatic rifles excelled at that range. 20 rounds without reloading. Sustained fire. The Army believed modern warfare required volume. The more rounds downrange, the better. But German officers operated beyond that range. At 400 to 600 yards, British semi-automatics lost accuracy. Rounds scattered. Hit rates dropped below 15%. Officers stood safely behind their advancing troops, completely untouchable, orchestrating attacks, while British units took casualties. The numbers told the story. In February 1942, the 2nd Battalion, King's Royal Rifle Corps, suffered 127 casualties during German advances. March showed similar patterns. Intelligence reports from 8th Army headquarters documented excellent German tactical coordination across multiple engagements. British units couldn't disrupt German command and control. They couldn't reach the officers giving the orders. They could only fire at infantry following those orders. And infantry without officers could be replaced. Officers with experience couldn't. The 2nd Battalion compiled casualty data through March. Every engagement where British forces took significant casualties showed the same pattern. German officers directing from extended range, 400 yards, 500 yards, sometimes 600, always beyond effective British rifle range, always safe, always coordinating. 23 separate engagements, 127 casualties, 0 German officer casualties. The mathematics was brutal and simple. British troops died while German officers watched. Command issued standard responses: avoid engagement when possible. Call for artillery support, request airstrikes. But artillery took 15 minutes to coordinate. Airstrikes required clear weather and available aircraft. German attacks happened in minutes. German officers adjusted faster than British support could respond. By the time artillery rounds landed, German officers had moved. By the time aircraft arrived, attacks had succeeded or failed. British infantry needed a solution that worked in seconds, not minutes. They didn't have one. Cambridge graduate. He'd been in North Africa 7 weeks. His platoon held a position near Tobruk when German infantry attacked at 0630. Hartford had 32 men. Good position. Clear fields of fire. His men engaged German infantry at 250 yards with semi-automatic rifles. They hit several advancing Germans. The attack should have stalled. But a German officer stood on a ridgeline 450 yards behind the infantry. Hartford saw him through binoculars. Saw the officer directing the attack with hand signals. Saw runners carrying orders. Hartford tried engaging the officer with his pistol. Useless at that range. His men fired at the infantry. The officer adjusted tactics. Signaled flanking maneuver. German troops shifted left, exploited a gap in British lines Hartford hadn't seen. Machine gun fire raked Hartford's position. Hartford was hit 3 times. Died before medics reached him. 14 men in his platoon were wounded. The German officer walked away untouched. Watched the whole engagement from his ridgeline, safe at the 450 yards. Sergeant Peter Hollis died on February 27th, age 29, from Manchester. 2 years in North Africa. He knew the desert, knew German tactics. His section defended a supply depot when German forces attacked at 1400 hours. Hollis identified the German officer immediately. 520 yards out. The officer was directing mortar fire, adjusting coordinates. Hollis understood that killing the officer would disrupt the entire attack. He tried engaging with his semi-automatic rifle. Fired 10 rounds. All missed. The range was too far. The rifle wasn't designed for that distance. Hollis fired another 10 rounds. Same result. The German officer continued directing mortar fire. 3 minutes later, a mortar round hit Hollis's position. Hollis died instantly. 6 men in his section were wounded. 2 others killed. The German officer completed his mission and withdrew. Never exposed to effective fire. Protected by distance, British weapons couldn't overcome. Corporal Michael Dawson was Harwell's friend. Same platoon, age 26, from Leeds. They'd trained together in England, shipped to North Africa on the same transport, shared the same tent. Dawson told jokes, made people laugh, kept morale up when the desert heat made everything miserable. On March 14th, German armor probed British positions near Gazala. Dawson's squad held the left flank. German infantry advanced with tank support. A German captain stood 470 yards back, directing the armor through hand signals and a radio operator beside him. Dawson saw the captain, understood the captain was coordinating the entire attack. Dawson fired his entire 20-round magazine, not at the infantry, at the captain. All 20 rounds missed. The captain was too far away. Semi-automatic rifles scattered at that range. Dawson reloaded, fired another magazine, another 20 rounds, 0 hits. The German tanks overran Dawson's position. He died from tank fire. Harwell watched it happen. Watched his friend die trying to hit a target his weapon couldn't reach. Watched the German captain walk away unharmed. 3 men, 3 deaths. Same pattern. German officers beyond reach. British soldiers dying. And nobody in command seemed to understand that the problem wasn't German infantry. Problem was German officers directing that infantry from distances British weapons couldn't touch. William Harwell grew up in rural Yorkshire near Skipton. Born 1908. His father, George Harwell, worked as gamekeeper on Lord Ashton's estate. 12,000 acres, woods, moors, deer populations that needed managing. George taught his son to shoot at age 11, not for sport, for work, culling red deer that overpopulated the estate. The work required precision. Lord Ashton didn't tolerate wounded animals. Clean kills only. One shot, no suffering, no wasted ammunition. Harwell learned on a Lee-Enfield, the same rifle gamekeepers had used for decades. He learned wind reading by watching grass move. Learned elevation compensation by missing shots and calculating corrections. Learned breathing technique because his father made him hold his breath and squeeze the trigger between heartbeats. By age 14, Harwell could hit deer at 300 yards consistently. By age 18, 400 yards. He worked as assistant gamekeeper for 12 years before the war. Fired an estimated 4,000 rounds at long range. Knew bullet drop at every distance. Knew wind drift calculations instinctively. Knew the Lee-Enfield's capabilities better than the men who designed it. When war started in September 1939, Harwell enlisted immediately. Age 31. Older than most recruits. The Army assigned him to the 2nd Battalion, King's Royal Rifle Corps. Infantry. Standard rifleman. They issued him a Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I. The same rifle he'd used in Yorkshire. He qualified expert marksman, scored highest in his training company. The instructors noticed, but didn't care. Expert marksman with a bolt-action rifle meant nothing in modern warfare. Modern warfare required volume of fire. That's what the training manuals said. Harwell deployed to North Africa in January 1941. 14 months of combat by March 1942. He'd seen Tobruk, seen the desert campaigns, seen German tactics evolve, seen British tactics stay static. In early 1942, the Army began issuing semi-automatic rifles to frontline units. M1917 Enfield rifles, American design, 20-round magazines, no bolt operation between shots, just pull the trigger, fire, pull again, fire. Volume of fire, modern warfare. Most riflemen in Harwell's platoon switched immediately, excited about the new rifles, more firepower, faster shooting. But Harwell refused to turn in his Lee-Enfield. His company commander, Captain James Reynolds, called him into the command tent, asked why he wouldn't take the new rifle. Harwell said the Lee-Enfield was more accurate at long range. Reynolds said long range didn't matter. Combat happened at 200 yards. Volume mattered. Harwell said volume didn't matter if you couldn't hit anything. Reynolds said Harwell was being stubborn. Gave him 1 week to switch rifles or face disciplinary action. Harwell kept the Lee-Enfield. Reynolds didn't follow through on the threat. The Desert War moved too fast for paperwork about rifle preferences. But Harwell's platoon mates noticed. They called him obsolete, called him grandfather, made jokes about fighting with museum pieces. Harwell didn't argue, just maintained his rifle, cleaned it every night, checked the bore, adjusted the sights. He'd watched Lieutenant Hartford die, watched Sergeant Hollis die, watched his friend Dawson die. All of them trying to hit German officers at ranges their semi-automatic rifles couldn't reach. And Harwell knew something nobody else seemed to understand. The Lee-Enfield could reach those ranges. He'd done it hundreds of times. One shot, one kill. Precision over volume. It worked on Yorkshire deer. It would work on German officers. March 28, 1942, 6:47 a.m. Harwell returned to the moment. Prone position, German officer at 480 yards. His platoon firing at infantry 200 yards out. The sound of 31 semi-automatic rifles filled the air. Hundreds of rounds, constant firing. The German infantry took casualties, but kept advancing. They had orders, they had coordination. They had an officer on that ridge telling them exactly what to do. Harwell calculated the shot. 480 yards. Wind from the left, maybe 8 miles per hour. He could see dust moving. The wind would push the bullet right. He compensated left. 6 inches at this range. The German officer was elevated, maybe 15 feet higher than Harwell's position. Bullet drop would be slightly less than a level shot. He adjusted his sight picture. The officer stood still, watching the battle through binoculars. Confident, safe, beyond the range of British weapons. Harwell had made this shot before. Red deer stag at 450 yards on Yorkshire moors. Clean kill. The deer never knew he was there. This was the same range, same calculation, same trigger control. The only difference was the target wore a German uniform instead of antlers. But the mathematics didn't care about uniforms. Physics worked the same whether you were shooting deer or officers. His platoon thought he was obsolete. Thought his rifle was obsolete. Thought precision didn't matter in modern warfare. But Dawson had died firing 40 rounds that all missed. Hartford had died watching an officer he couldn't reach. Hollis had died trying to hit a target his weapon couldn't touch. And that German officer on the ridge was directing an attack that would kill more British soldiers if nobody stopped him. Harwell ignored the infantry, aimed at the officer. Lee-Enfield to shoulder. Proper prone position. His father taught him this position 30 years ago. Stable, repeatable, effective. He took a deep breath, let half of it out, held. His heartbeat slowed. The rifle settled. The officer stood in his sight picture. Center mass, 480 yards. Wind compensation set. Elevation set. Everything calculated. He squeezed the trigger. Didn't jerk it, didn't pull it. Squeezed. Steady pressure. The Lee-Enfield fired. The bolt-action rifle everyone mocked. The obsolete weapon from 1907. The grandfather rifle that couldn't compete with modern semi-automatics. One shot. The .303 British round traveled 480 yards in 1.1 seconds. Harwell tracked through his sights. The round struck the German officer's center mass. The officer dropped. Binoculars fell from his hands. His body tumbled down the ridge. The entire sequence took 4 seconds from trigger squeeze to impact. German infantry stopped advancing immediately. No hand signals from the ridge. No runners with orders. No coordination. Infantry units looked back toward where their officer had been standing. Confusion spread through their formation. Some took cover. Some retreated. Some just stood there waiting for orders that wouldn't come. The attack pattern collapsed. Harwell worked the bolt, smooth motion, ejected the spent casing, chambered a new round, scanned for other officers, none visible. All had taken cover or withdrawn. He kept his rifle shouldered, ready, but the engagement was over. German infantry retreated. 200 yards became 300, then 400. No covering fire, no tactical withdrawal. Just scattered men running back toward their lines without leadership. Around Harwell, his platoon continued firing for 8 seconds before anyone noticed. Sergeant Thomas Webb called ceasefire. The shooting stopped. 31 men looked up from their rifles. German infantry was retreating. First time in 6 weeks, a German attack had broken without British casualties. The entire engagement lasted 4 minutes. Harwell had fired once. His platoon had fired approximately 600 rounds. His one shot stopped the attack. Their 600 rounds had hit some infantry, but hadn't disrupted the coordination. The mathematics was simple. One officer, eliminated at 480 yards, accomplished what 600 rounds at 200 yards couldn't. Webb moved down the line checking casualties. 0 wounded, 0 killed. First clean engagement since February. He reached Harwell's position, looked at the ridge where the German officer had fallen, looked at Harwell. "That was you?" Webb asked. "Yes, Sergeant." 480 yards with that bolt action? 480 yards, Harwell confirmed. Webb stared at the ridge for another moment. Then he walked toward the command post to report to Captain Reynolds. 20 minutes later, Reynolds arrived at Harwell's position. The captain was 32 years old, regular Army, 2 years in North Africa. He'd seen enough combat to recognize when something significant happened. "Corporal Harwell, Sergeant Webb says you shot that Jerry officer." "Yes, sir." 480 yards? "Yes, sir." "With your Lee-Enfield?" "Yes, sir. Rifle's accurate to 600 yards if you know how to use it properly." Reynolds looked at the bolt-action rifle. The obsolete weapon Harwell had refused to turn in. The grandfather rifle the platoon mocked. Reynolds had ordered Harwell to switch to a semi-automatic. Harwell had refused. Reynolds hadn't pushed the issue because there were more important things to worry about in the Desert War. Now he was reconsidering that decision. "Sergeant Webb watched through binoculars," Reynolds said. "He saw the officer drop, saw the entire German attack fall apart. Says you fired once and changed the whole engagement." "Officer was coordinating the attack, sir. Remove the coordinator, attack loses coherence." "Show me." Reynolds set up a test the next morning. March 29th. 50-gallon drum positioned at 500 yards. 3 other riflemen with semi-automatics fired first. Private David Mills fired 10 rounds, 0 hits. Private Robert Shaw fired 10 rounds, 1 hit. Corporal James Wright fired 10 rounds, 0 hits. 30 rounds total, 1 hit. 3% accuracy at 500 yards. Harwell fired 10 rounds with his Lee-Enfield, 8 hits, 80% accuracy, same range, same wind conditions, different results. The Lee-Enfield wasn't more powerful than the semi-automatics. It was more accurate. Less recoil. Better trigger. Bolt-action mechanism provided stability the semi-automatic gas systems couldn't match. The rifle worked exactly as designed. 1 shot, 1 hit. Precision. Reynolds watched all 8 rounds strike the drum. He didn't say anything immediately, just looked at the target, looked at Harwell, looked at the Lee-Enfield. Then he called a meeting with his section leaders, March 30th. Reynolds spread intelligence reports across a table in the command tent. Sergeant Webb stood beside him. 2 section leaders attended, Lance Corporal Edward Mitchell and Corporal Thomas Grant. Reynolds pointed to the reports. "Pattern analysis," Reynolds said. "February through March. Every engagement where we took significant casualties shows German officers directing from 400 to 600 yards. Hartford's platoon, Hollis's section, Dawson's squad, all of them. Officers beyond our effective range. Webb added details. Hartford died fighting an officer at 450 yards. Hollis died trying to hit an officer at 520 yards. Dawson died while a German captain stood at 470 yards coordinating armor. Reynolds continued. We've been fighting the wrong target. Infantry at 200 yards follow orders. Officers at 500 yards give those orders. Corporal Harwell proved yesterday that eliminating the officer eliminates the coordination. German infantry without officers can't maintain attacks. Mitchell spoke. He was 27, from Devon. Farmer before the war. He'd culled foxes at long range on his family's land. He understood precision shooting. Sir, are we talking about deliberately targeting officers? Yes. That's against convention, sir. Officers aren't supposed to target other officers deliberately. Reynolds looked at Mitchell for a long moment. Conventions written when officers led cavalry charges with sabers. Afrika Korps uses modern tactics. We need to respond with modern solutions. Besides, I don't see German officers following those conventions. They target our officers just fine. Grant raised the practical question. How many men in the battalion can make shots at 500 yards? That's what we need to determine, Reynolds said. Harwell made the shot with a bolt-action Lee-Enfield. How many other men still carry Lee-Enfields? How many have long-range shooting experience? Webb knew the numbers. Maybe 20 men in the battalion still carry Lee-Enfields. Most switch to semi-automatics. Of those 20, maybe 5 have hunting backgrounds. Real long-range work. Reynolds turned to Harwell. Corporal, can you train men in this technique? Yes, sir. Anyone with patience and steady hands can learn. Needs a week of intensive work, range time, wind reading, elevation compensation, breathing technique. Select 3 men, train them, 1 week. We'll test the concept again in combat. If it works, we expand the program. What's the official designation, sir? Webb asked. Advanced Marksmanship Section, Reynolds said. If command asks, we're conducting marksmanship training. Nothing more. Mitchell understood what wasn't being said. And unofficially? Reynolds looked at all of them. Unofficially, every German officer who shows himself at 500 yards gets dropped. Dawson died because we couldn't reach the German captain directing that armor attack. Hartford died because we couldn't reach the officer on the ridgeline. Hollis died trying to hit an officer with a weapon that couldn't reach. That stops now. Gentlemen's warfare ended when my men started dying. Questions? Nobody had questions. Harwell, select your team. Begin training tomorrow. Dismissed. Harwell selected 3 riflemen on April 1st, 1942. Lance Corporal Edward Mitchell, age 27. Devon farmer. Culled foxes at 300 yards protecting livestock. Quiet. Methodical. Still carried a Lee-Enfield because he trusted what he knew. Refused the semi-automatic the same way Harwell had. Private Henry Walsh, age 24, from Scotland. Grew up hunting red deer in the Highlands. 9 years shooting experience. His father had been a gamekeeper like Harwell's. Walsh understood long-range shooting instinctively. Best natural marksman in the platoon after Harwell. Private George Burton, age 29, from Surrey. No hunting background. But he'd been a machine gunner for 8 months before switching to rifle. Understood fire discipline. Understood ammunition conservation. Understood that hitting 1 target mattered more than missing 20 targets. He'd requested transfer to a Lee-Enfield after watching Harwell's demonstration. Said volume was useless if you couldn't hit anything. Training started April 2nd. 1 week intensive. Mornings at the range. Afternoons studying wind and elevation. Evenings reviewing German officer behavior from intelligence reports. Day 1 and 2 covered fundamentals. Prone position stability. Breathing cycle. Inhale fully. Exhale halfway. Hold. Squeeze trigger between heartbeats. Trigger control. Steady pressure. No jerking. Natural point of aim. Let the rifle settle where it wants to point. Don't fight it. Day 3 and 4 covered environmental factors. Wind reading through dust movement and mirage. Wind compensation. 1 inch per mile per hour at 500 yards. So 8 mile per hour wind meant 8 inches. Elevation compensation for bullet drop. Temperature effects. Hot air made bullets rise slightly. Cold air made them drop. Day 5 and 6 covered target identification. German officer insignia at distance. How to spot captains versus lieutenants. Behavior patterns. Officers used binoculars, carried map boards, positioned runners nearby. Priority targets were captains and above. They coordinated larger operations. Secondary targets were lieutenants directing platoons. Day 7 was combat simulation. Moving targets at 450 to 500 yards. Time pressure. Acquire target within 30 seconds. Fire. Work bolt. Reacquire target. Fire again within 8 seconds. Mitchell scored 6 hits out of 10 at 500 yards. Walsh scored 7 out of 10. Burton scored 5 out of 10, but was improving. Harwell scored 9 out of 10. All 4 were combat ready. April 8, 1942. The team was ready to test whether precision could replace volume. Whether 4 men with bolt-action rifles could accomplish what 30 men with semi-automatics couldn't. Whether German officers would keep standing at 500 yards once they realized British marksmen could reach them. April 11, 1942. German forces advanced near Akroma, 4 miles west of Tobruk. The precision team deployed before dawn. Harwell, Mitchell, Walsh, Burton. 4 men with Lee-Enfield rifles. They positioned on a ridge overlooking the German approach. 800 yards from the expected German assembly area. Good elevation. Clear sight lines. They waited. German infantry appeared at 0700 hours. Standard formation. Approximately 150 men, moving toward British positions. At 0715, German officers emerged, 3 of them, standing 420, 480, and 510 yards from the precision team's position. The officers carried map boards and binoculars. They were coordinating the attack. Harwell assigned targets through hand signals. Mitchell took the closest officer at 420 yards. Harwell took the middle officer at 480 yards. Walsh took the farthest at 510 yards. Burt observed and provided wind readings, 8 miles per hour, right to left. Consistent. At 0723, Mitchell fired. Single shot. The German captain at 420 yards dropped. The bullet struck center mass. The officer fell. German infantry immediately slowed their advance. Confusion spread through the formation. 1 minute later, Harwell fired. The German lieutenant at 480 yards went down. Upper torso hit. The officer collapsed. German infantry stopped advancing completely. Men looked around for direction that wouldn't come. Walsh engaged the 3rd officer at 510 yards. His first shot missed. Wind compensation error. He'd underestimated the drift. He worked the bolt, ejected the casing, chambered a new round, recalculated, increased the wind allowance, fired again. The second shot hit. The German lieutenant at 510 yards fell. 3 German officers eliminated in 3 minutes. The German infantry formation disintegrated. No coordination, no hand signals, no runners with orders. Men scattered, some retreated, some took cover and waited. The attack collapsed without accomplishing any objectives. British casualties were 0. Reynolds watched the engagement through binoculars from British lines. He saw all 3 officers fall, saw the German attack fall apart. When the precision team returned, Reynolds met them personally. 3 officers, 3 minutes. 0 British casualties, Reynolds said. 4 shots did what 400 couldn't. Sergeant Webb added his observation. Germans pulled back in complete disorder. First time I've seen them retreat like that. They didn't know what to do without officers telling them. Word spread through the battalion immediately. Other platoon leaders heard about the engagement by afternoon. Other companies requested information by evening. The precision team had proven the concept. Eliminate German officers at extended range, disrupt coordination, save British lives. The mathematics worked. By April 20th, Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel James Hastings compiled the statistics. Between April 11th and April 20th, Harwell's precision team had eliminated 11 German officers. 7 German attacks were disrupted before accomplishing objectives. British casualties in those engagements were 3 wounded, 0 killed. Hastings compared those numbers to February. 127 casualties in similar numbers of engagements. The difference was officer elimination. When German officers died at 500 yards, German infantry couldn't maintain coordinated attacks. The casualty reduction was 97%. Hastings authorized expansion. Each of the battalion's 4 companies would form precision teams. 16 total riflemen trained in long-range engagement. 4-man teams. Lee-Enfield rifles. Official designation remained Advanced Marksmanship Section. Unofficial mission remained officer elimination. Training began April 23rd. Harwell and Mitchell became instructors. They taught 12 additional riflemen over 7 days. Same curriculum, fundamentals, environmental factors, target identification, combat simulation. Selection criteria emphasized hunting background and patience. 3 riflemen washed out. Couldn't achieve 6 hits out of 10 at 500 yards. The standard was firm. Miss at 500 yards meant German officers survived. German officers surviving meant British soldiers died. By April 30th, 13 new precision shooters were qualified. Combined with Harwell's original team, the battalion had 16 trained marksmen capable of engaging targets at 400 to 600 yards. Each received Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I rifles. Some received match-grade .303 British ammunition, better accuracy, tighter tolerances. A few teams received telescopic sights, 4 times magnification, increased effective range to 700 yards, but availability was limited. Maybe 5 scoped rifles in the entire battalion. German intelligence noticed the pattern by early May. After-action reports from multiple units mentioned officer casualties. Unusual casualty rates. Captains and lieutenants killed at extended ranges. Always 400 to 600 yards. Always single shots. Always during coordinated attacks. Oberst Franz Dietrich commanded Afrika Korps intelligence for the sector. He compiled casualty data through April. 23 German officers killed. All at 400 to 600 yards. All by single rifle shots. All during attacks where officers were directing operations. The British had changed tactics. Dietrich issued a directive on May 8th. German officers were ordered to position themselves minimum 700 yards from engagements. Alternative positioning was closer integration with infantry under heavy cover. Hand signal communication was abandoned. Radio communication was emphasized instead. The directive stated clearly that British precision marksmen were targeting command personnel. Officers needed to adapt or die. Harwell's team encountered the new tactics on May 12th during a German attack near Gazala. No officers visible at 400 to 600 yards. Officers had repositioned to 750 yards. Beyond Lee-Enfield effective range, some officers integrated with infantry at 200 yards, but stayed behind heavy cover. The Germans had adapted. The precision teams adapted in response. Officers at 700 yards were beyond reliable range. But officers integrated with infantry eventually exposed themselves. Command required observation. Officers needed to see the battlefield to direct operations. They had to look over cover eventually. 3 to 5 second windows. Harwell's solution was patience. Wait for exposure. Shoot immediately when targets appeared. Mitchell experimented with longer range shots. He modified ammunition loads, increased propellant. Dangerous and unofficial, against regulations. But he achieved hits at 650 yards. Inconsistent beyond that distance. Not reliable enough for combat use. The Lee-Enfield had limitations. 700 yards was too far for consistent accuracy. The German adaptation proved the tactic was effective. Germans didn't change positioning unless the threat was real. Officer casualties hurt them badly enough to force tactical changes. That fear was valuable. German officers reluctant to expose themselves meant degraded coordination. Degraded coordination meant fewer British casualties. Statistics quantified the psychological impact. German attack frequency decreased from 4.2 attacks per week in April to 2.8 per week in May. German officer casualties totaled 23 between April and May. German tactical caution increased visibly. British casualty reduction in the battalion held steady at 34% compared to February. June 18, 1942. Word reached 8th Army headquarters. Major General Bernard Montgomery reviewed intelligence reports about precision marksman tactics. Montgomery wasn't commanding 8th Army yet. That would come in August. But he was already reviewing tactical innovations. The casualty reduction statistics caught his attention. He requested a briefing. Harwell was summoned to headquarters. First time he'd left battalion lines since February. They brought him to Montgomery's operations tent. Also present were 3 staff officers and Chaplain Captain Robert Harrison. Montgomery asked direct questions. Corporal Harwell, you target German officers specifically? Yes, sir. 400 to 600 yards. How many have you eliminated personally? 23 confirmed, sir, between April and mid-June. With a bolt-action Lee-Enfield? Yes, sir. More accurate than semi-automatics at extended range. Chaplain Harrison interrupted. This targeting of officers violates conventions of warfare. Officers are not to be deliberately targeted by other officers or soldiers. Montgomery responded immediately. Conventions written when officers led cavalry with sabers. Afrika Korps uses modern tactics. We must respond appropriately. A staff officer, Colonel James Wright, raised concerns. If word spreads, Germans might retaliate against our officers. Montgomery dismissed this. Germans already target our officers. They're simply less effective. We're better shots. Harrison pressed the moral argument. There's a distinction between combat necessity and deliberate assassination of leadership. Harwell spoke without being asked. Breach of protocol. But he'd watched 27 men die. Permission to speak, sir. I've watched 27 men from my battalion die in 4 months. Hartford, Hollis, Dawson, others. All because German officers stood at 500 yards untouchable. I started targeting those officers in April. Battalion casualties dropped 34%. Mathematics says targeting officers saves British lives. Morality should follow mathematics, sir. Silence filled the tent for 10 seconds. Montgomery looked at Harwell, looked at the chaplain, made his decision. War is immoral by definition, gentlemen. Our obligation is ending it quickly while preserving our soldiers' lives. If eliminating German officers at 600 yards accomplishes that, then eliminating officers becomes moral necessity. However, this tactic will not be officially documented. No written orders, no commendations, no public acknowledgement. Corporal Harwell, return to your battalion. Continue your work. But understand you're conducting operations the British Army will never officially recognize. History may judge us. I'd rather be judged while alive than praised while dead. Harwell's response was simple. I don't need recognition, sir. I need my mates to stop dying. Montgomery nodded. Then we're in agreement. Harwell returned to battalion lines the next day. The precision teams continued operations. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, German officers were dying at 500 yards. July through September 1942, the precision marksman tactics spread across 8th Army through word of mouth. No official training program existed, no written doctrine. But battalion commanders talked. Company leaders shared information. Riflemen with hunting backgrounds were quietly pulled aside and trained in long-range engagement techniques. By August, 4 battalions employed precision teams. By September, 11 battalions. Each battalion fielded 4 to 8 trained marksmen. Total estimated precision shooters across 8th Army reached 140 to 180 men by September. Equipment remained inconsistent. Most teams used standard Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I rifles. Some units acquired scoped rifles. Canadian troops contributed Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I T models with telescopic sights. Scopes increased effective range to 700 yards. But availability was limited. Maybe 20 scoped rifles total across the entire Army. Most precision shooters worked with iron sights and 12 years of practice like Harwell. German officer casualties climbed steadily. 87 confirmed kills between July and September. British casualty reduction in units employing precision teams averaged 34% compared to pre-April rates. German tactical adaptation continued. Officers stayed farther back, used more cover, relied on radio communication instead of visual observation. But radios failed. Batteries died. Communications broke down. Officers eventually had to observe the battlefield directly. And when they did, British marksmen were waiting at 500 yards. Radio intercepts captured German frustration. One message from July mentioned British hunter teams targeting command personnel. Another from August warned German units about exposing officers during operations. Psychological impact was measurable. German officers were afraid. Fear degraded leadership effectiveness. Units without confident leadership performed worse than units with officers willing to take risks. Lance Corporal Edward Mitchell died on August 23rd. German sniper, 400 yards. The Germans had deployed counter-sniper teams specifically to eliminate British precision shooters. Mitchell had trained under Harwell in April, first member of the original precision team. He'd eliminated 19 German officers in 4 months. Age 27. Devon farmer who'd culled foxes before the war, buried in a Commonwealth cemetery near El Alamein. Harwell attended the burial, said only one thing. He saved more lives than we'll ever count. October 23rd, 1942. Second Battle of El Alamein began at 21:40 hours. Allied artillery bombardment, 882 guns, largest barrage in North African campaign. Dust and smoke reduced visibility to 200 yards in some sectors. Harwell's precision team positioned in the northern sector overlooking German defensive positions. Harwell, Walsh, Burton, plus 2 newer riflemen trained in June. Their mission was unofficial. Eliminate German officers during the opening phase. Disrupt command and control before German forces could organize defensive responses. At 21:57, German officers appeared on a ridgeline 520 yards from Harwell's position. 4 officers with map boards, assessing damage from the artillery bombardment, coordinating defensive responses. Harwell's team engaged immediately. 5 shots in 30 seconds. 3 German officers confirmed down. The 4th took cover and disappeared into the smoke. Across the northern sector, other precision teams executed similar engagements. 12 German officers eliminated in the first hour of battle. German defensive coordination suffered immediately. Radio intercepts captured confusion. Units requested orders. Officers were dead or hiding. Responses came slowly or not at all. British infantry advanced against disorganized resistance. Harwell's count for El Alamein was 4 confirmed eliminations. Total career count reached 27 German officers, April through October. 7 months. Average 3.9 per month. All engagements between 420 and 580 yards. Estimated ammunition expended was 45 rounds total. Hit rate approximately 60%. Each round that hit eliminated an officer coordinating German operations. Each eliminated officer saved British lives through degraded German coordination. British victory at El Alamein came on November 4th. Multiple factors contributed: superior numbers, better logistics, air superiority, artillery dominance. But German reports consistently mentioned command disruption. Oberst Dietrich compiled a final intelligence assessment in November before capture by British forces. His report stated clearly that British precision marksmen had degraded Afrika Korps officer corps by 12% over 6 months. Coordination became impossible under those conditions. Harwell received promotion to sergeant in December 1942. He declined officer commission, said he was a shooter, not a leader. Continued training riflemen through the end of North Africa campaign. Trained approximately 80 additional marksmen between December and May 1943. Tunisia campaign added 6 more confirmed eliminations to his count. Total reached 33. July 1943. Harwell transferred to Italy with the battalion. Sicily invasion. Italian campaign. Mountainous terrain provided longer sight lines, 600 to 800 yards possible in some locations. Precision tactics adapted to terrain. Italian campaign added 4 more confirmed eliminations. Career total reached 37 German officers killed between April 1942 and January 1944. Private Henry Walsh survived the war. 31 confirmed eliminations, returned to Scotland. Never spoke about North Africa. Died in 1978. Private George Burton was killed in January 1944 in Italy. Age 30. 18 confirmed eliminations. Buried in Commonwealth Cemetery near Naples. Harwell received no commendations for precision marksman work. Standard campaign medals only. North Africa Star. Italy Star. War Medal. No mention of 37 German officers. No recognition of tactical innovation. No official acknowledgement. Montgomery's promise held. The British Army never documented what Harwell did. The war ended in August 1945. Harwell was 37 years old. He demobilized and returned to Yorkshire. Resumed work as gamekeeper on Lord Ashton's estate. Same work he'd done before the war. Culling red deer at 300 to 400 yards. Clean kills. 1 shot. Nobody on the estate knew he'd killed 37 German officers. Nobody knew he'd changed British tactics. Nobody knew he'd saved thousands of lives through casualty reduction across 8th Army. Montgomery sent a private letter to Harwell in May 1945. Never officially filed. Found in Harwell family papers after his death decades later. Montgomery wrote that Harwell's unorthodox approach had saved thousands of British lives. That history wouldn't record his contribution as agreed in June 1942. But Montgomery wouldn't forget. The letter ended with gratitude and respect. Harwell never mentioned the war. When asked, he said he'd been a rifleman, did his bit, nothing more. He lived alone in a cottage on the estate. Never married. Quiet life. Worked as gamekeeper until 1973. Age 65. Retirement. In 1978, military historian Dr. James Crawford researched North Africa campaign tactics, found references to advanced marksmanship sections in battalion records, cross-referenced with German captured documents mentioning British hunter troops, traced Harwell through military service records, contacted him for an interview. Harwell initially refused. Crawford showed him German intelligence reports, showed him Oberst Dietrich's assessment about 12% officer corps degradation, showed him radio intercepts mentioning British precision teams. Harwell finally agreed to talk. 2 conditions: no recording, nothing published until after his death. Crawford asked if Harwell regretted what he did. Harwell's response was simple. Regret saving British lives? No. Regret killing? Yes. But regret's a luxury. Somebody had to stop those officers. I could, so I did. Mathematics, not emotion. Crawford asked about recognition. Harwell said he didn't need medals for doing his job. The Army gave him a mission: stop the enemy. He stopped them. The men who came home because German officers couldn't coordinate attacks was recognition enough. Final question. What did Harwell want people to know? That precision matters. That old methods aren't wrong just because they're old. That one accurate shot beats 20 inaccurate ones. That sometimes the weapon everybody mocks is exactly the weapon you need. William Harwell died March 15, 1989. Age 81. Heart failure. Small funeral. 12 attendees, estate workers mostly. Buried in Skipton Village Cemetery. Headstone read, William Harwell, 1908 to 1989. Gamekeeper. No mention of military service, no mention of North Africa, no mention of 37 German officers eliminated. No mention of thousands of British lives saved through casualty reduction. Lord Ashton spoke at the funeral. Said Bill was the finest shot he'd ever known. Never missed. Never wasted a bullet. Always did his job perfectly. Ashton didn't know how true that statement was. Dr. Crawford published his research in 1991. Book titled Precision War: The Untold Story of British Marksmen in North Africa. Entire chapter dedicated to Harwell and precision teams. Used German documents, British battalion records, interviews. First time the tactic was publicly acknowledged. British Army declined official comment. Ministry of Defense stated they couldn't confirm specific operations from World War II. No posthumous commendations were issued. But quietly, modern sniper training schools began teaching the case study. Harwell's philosophy was incorporated into precision marksman training. One accurate shot beats sustained inaccurate fire. Equipment choices should match mission requirements. Target priority should focus on command and control disruption. Harwell was never officially credited, but techniques clearly derived from his work. Modern military assessment quantified the impact. U.S. Army Special Operations Command study in 2003 analyzed historical precision marksman effectiveness. Found that single precision shooters eliminating command personnel disrupted enemy operations equivalent to effects of 15 to 20 infantry. Training costs for one precision shooter were less than equipping 10 infantry with modern rifles. Conclusions stated that Harwell's approach remained valid 60 years later. Statistical legacy: 37 confirmed kills by Harwell personally. 340 plus confirmed kills by all precision teams in 1942. 34% casualty reduction in units using tactics. Estimated 2,000 to 3,000 British lives saved based on casualty reduction across 8th Army. All accomplished with obsolete bolt-action rifles that everyone mocked. The Lee-Enfield No. 4 Mark I entered service in 1941. Bolt-action, 10 rounds, designed based on 1907 principles. By 1942, military theorists considered it obsolete. Semi-automatic rifles represented the future. Volume of fire won battles. Everyone knew that. Except Harwell proved them wrong. Precision at 500 yards beat volume at 200 yards for specific missions. One officer eliminated disrupted entire attacks. The obsolete rifle saved thousands of lives because someone understood its proper application. Harwell's rifle, serial number 47833, remained in his possession after demobilization. Technically against regulations, he used it for gamekeeper work until 1973. When he retired, the rifle went to his nephew Malcolm. Malcolm donated it to Imperial War Museum in 1995. Currently displayed in North Africa Campaign Section. Placard states, "Standard issue Lee-Enfield rifle, typical of those used by British infantry in North Africa." Nothing about Harwell, nothing about 37 officers, nothing about tactics. Just another old rifle in a museum. Innovation happens when someone sees what everyone misses. When someone refuses to accept that old means obsolete. When someone understands tools better than people who issued them. Harwell saw German officers at 500 yards coordinating attacks. Everyone else shot at infantry at 200 yards. Harwell understood the Lee-Enfield could reach 500 yards. Everyone else thought bolt actions were obsolete. Harwell calculated that eliminating one officer disrupted entire operations. Everyone else believed volume of fire won battles. He was 34 years old, Yorkshire gamekeeper, 12 years shooting deer, 1 Lee-Enfield rifle, and mathematics that proved precision beat volume. 37 German officers eliminated, 2,000 to 3,000 British lives saved, 0 official recognition. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through doctrine committees, through gamekeepers who see problems differently, who refuse to accept the old answer is the only answer, who understand that sometimes the weapon everyone rejects is exactly the weapon you need. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're uncovering hidden histories every week. Real people, real innovation, real impact. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Texas, Germany, Australia. Our community spans the globe. You're not just watching, you're keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure William Harwell doesn't disappear into silence.